The compact automatic rifle that Stalin's engineers unveiled in 1947 didn't look like much of a gun. The result of a secret design contest, its components were simple, inelegant, workmanlike. Its ammunition lacked the stopping power of other rifle cartridges. Its barrel was too short to achieve the range of standard infantry rifles. When the Pentagon finally got its hands on a few of the weapons in the 1950s, officials scoffed. But from this unheralded beginning, the Soviet Union's modest little gun, dubbed the Avtomat Kalashnikov 47, would become one of the most recognizable artifacts of the 20th century. The AK-47 and its variants can be seen as a lot of things: amoral massacre machines, pop culture icons, the most plentiful and influential weaponry of the past half-century. But the gun can also be viewed as one of the most disruptive technologies ever. Quickly transcending the purposes and borders of the highly centralized state that created it, the AK-47 gives individuals and small groups a lethality that previously belonged only to rigidly organized and well-financed militaries. What it may have lacked in precision and power it has made up for in ease of use, cost, reliability, and readily available parts and ammunition. It has helped ensure that even the poor, the small-statured, the dim-witted, the illiterate, and the untrained are able to acquire weapons and keep them functioning. The AK-47's rise was enabled by a government-led manufacturing push. Throughout the 1950s, the Kremlin shared its new rifles with like-minded states and ordered its Warsaw Pact vassals to produce them. By the 1960s, factories were churning out AK-47s in the planned economies of the Eastern Bloc, where the communist governments distributed and stockpiled the rifles by the tens of millions, whether anyone wanted them or not. That oversupply, combined with poor security and rampant corruption, meant that by the 1970s and 80s, the guns were available to fighters for almost any cause. After the Warsaw Pact unraveled and the Soviet Union collapsed, many successor governments lost custody of their surplus arsenals, providing an almost boundless new supply. Today, the AK is almost everywhere, and it has fundamentally rewritten the rules of modern warfare, giving bands of moderately skilled fighters with few other resources the power to take on, and defeat, some of the best resourced armies in the world. Stalin's rifle became, and remains, the everyman gun, a success, and scourge, that is sure to last well into the 21st century. The AK-47 has powered some of the most dramatic revolutions of the past half-century. But it was originally engineered to reinforce state power, not overturn it. Indeed, its very design was the result of an intensive state-directed pursuit. The Soviet Union, impressed by the ammunition and performance of a medium-powered automatic rifle used by Nazi forces, launched a contest within its secret arms design community to create a similar weapon. Competing teams saw one another's submissions as the field was narrowed, freely borrowing ideas from their rivals and from existing guns. The winning design was in reality a mashup forged by many minds. That may have made for a good gun, but it didn't make for a good backstory. The Soviet propaganda mill claimed the AK was the brainchild of Senior Sergeant Mikhail Kalashnikov, a proletariat tinkerer who was inspired to create it after being wounded in a battle against the Nazis. But while Kalashnikov got credit as the leader of the winning design team, official glory in which he basks to this day, he was really a part of a huge government machine that ordered up and then fine-tuned and mass-produced the resulting gun. Receiver. Early versions of the AK-47 included a receiver, the main body of the weapon, not including the barrel, constructed out of a block of solid steel that had been cut, ground, and drilled into shape by assembly line workers. The Soviet Union spent 10 years figuring out how to design a receiver that could be machine-stamped, which would result in a lighter gun and cut down on the cost of labor and raw materials. By 1959, the stamped metal AKM had replaced the first-generation AK-47 and soon became the most widely distributed version of the rifle. Gas system. This combination of port, cylinder, piston, and return spring is key to the AK-47's reliability. When propellant burns at near explosive speeds, it releases more energy than needed to fire the bullet. The gas system captures some of that energy and puts it to work ejecting spent cartridges and loading fresh ones. The gun's parts are heavy and loose enough to plow through grit or mud. That reliability comes at the expense of accuracy, but the AK-47's designers ignored the Western preference for tight-fitting rifles in favor of one that would almost always work. Front sight post. This elevated sight, which helps shooters see over the gas tube above the barrel, also contributes to the AK-47's distinctive shape. Similar posts had appeared on previous guns, including the AS-44, an earlier Soviet project. M1943 cartridge. In 1943, the Soviets captured an unusual cartridge from Nazi soldiers on Germany's Eastern Front. The cartridge, roughly midway in size between traditional rifle and pistol ammo, lacked the power for effective long-range shooting but was more than adequate for most combat. It generated less heat and recoil, which meant that guns built around it could be lighter, cheaper, and easier to fire. The Soviets decided to design their own version of the cartridge, called the M1943, and then a new weapon to fire it, the Kalashnikov assault rifle. Magazine. One of the eye-catching traits that gives the Kalashnikov line its iconic profile is the magazine, curved to account for the tapered shape of the cartridges. Other guns had used curved magazines, but as the AK grew more popular, the shape became associated with the Kalashnikov. The magazine, which has a reinforced metal lip to prevent damage, is one reason the gun rarely jams. This contrasts sharply with the magazines that have fed the American M16 and M4 over the years, which have been endlessly redesigned and reissued, as late as 2009. Dust cover, selector switch. Big and easy to find, this unmistakable and simple feature allows users to switch between safe, automatic, and semi-automatic fire as well as prevents dust and sand from entering the weapon's chamber. Mikhail Kalashnikov, who, at 90, still lives in Zhevsk, Russia, is intensely proud of it, but many dislike it. The switch can be bulky, and it often makes a loud click when manipulated. It's also not original. Remington's Model 8, developed several decades before, had a similar mechanism. Part 3: Impact on the World. The Kalashnikov was designed to be a tool of the state, with its earliest production runs distributed exclusively to Soviet soldiers. By the mid-1950s, the Soviet Union was supplying AK-47s to ideologically aligned states like China and East Germany. By the late 50s, the USSR had set up a kind of franchising model, sharing the specs with communist government-run munitions factories around the world, allowing for local varieties and derivations. But as more Kalashnikovs were assembled, they started drifting from state hands, supplied to proxy forces, sold to shifty purchasers, and stolen from underprotected weapons depots. Soon, the guns were being used by guerrilla groups against the very governments that produced them. El Salvador. 1980 to 1992. The leftist guerrillas of the FMLN used guns from East Germany and North Korea and ammunition from Cuba, a distributed global network to arm Soviet-friendly groups. Today, the FMLN is a legitimate political party, holding the presidency. Venezuela. 2006-present. In 2006, Hugo Chavez purchases 100,000 AKs and a license to manufacture the guns, leading the Pentagon to worry that he might try to become an arms broker. His factory is due to open in 2011. Munich Olympics. Germany, 1972. 8 young Palestinians disguised as athletes entered the Olympic Village carrying Kalashnikovs in duffels and seized Israeli athletes. The dark spectacle played out on live TV and ushered in the era of modern terror. The Hungarian Revolution. 1956. The AK-47 was intended as a tool to put down anti-Soviet uprisings. But Hungarian rebels picked up guns abandoned in Budapest. The one-time tool of the police state was turned against its makers. Sadat assassination. Egypt, 1981. Soldiers on parade turned their axe, which the Egyptians had manufactured to strengthen the state, on their president, Anwar Sadat, killing him in full view of the world. The nation plunged into martial law. Iraq War. 2003 to 2010. After U.S. troops were met by Kalashnikov-carrying soldiers and insurgents, the Pentagon purchased tens of thousands of the guns to arm local security forces. Afghanistan. 1979 present. Akhtoting Mujahedin, armed by Pakistan, the US, Saudi Arabia, and others, drove out the Soviet army. Some of the same fighters are now members of the Taliban, aiming their axe at US and NATO forces. Vietnam War. 1961 to 1973. The USSR and China passed tax to the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong, whose uneducated and agrarian forces used them to outgun U.S. troops. The weapon's reputation was forged here. Uprising in Uganda. 1987 present. Warlord Joseph Kony used abducted children as his soldiers in his campaign against Uganda's government. He armed them with axe, easy to use. They're the ideal weapon for children. Rwandan genocide. 1994. Machetes and farm tools are remembered as the weapons of the Hutu militias, but axes were widely used too. The gun was also seen in genocides like the massacre of Kurds in Iraq and the slaughter of Bosnians in Srebrenica. Mozambique. 1964 present. The leftist guerrillas of the FMLN used guns from East Germany and North Korea and ammunition from Cuba, a distributed global network to arm Soviet-friendly groups. Today, the FMLN is a legitimate political party, holding the presidency. 2001. The anonymous anti-hero of Grand Theft Auto 3 terrorizes the good people of Liberty City with a baseball bat, a rocket launcher, and an AK-47 variant. 2001. Andrei Kirilenko, born in Kalashnikov's hometown of Zevsk, starts playing forward for the Utah Jazz. His jersey number, 47. Guess his nickname. 1997. In Jackie Brown, Samuel L. Jackson waxes rhapsodic, "When you absolutely, positively got to kill every motherfucker in the room, except no substitutes." 1988. NWA's Straight Outta Compton, the defining anthem of gangsta rap, includes a shout-out to the Kalashnikov. AK-47 is the tool. 1984. In Red Dawn, a group of U.S. teens played by the likes of Patrick Swayze and Lee Thompson repel communist invaders by using the Reds' own axe against them. 2005. Design guru Philippe Starck releases a Lux line of gun-shaped lamps, including an AK-47 model, available in chrome or gold. Great for armchair dictators. 1996. Brooklyn hipsters declare their allegiance to the borough, and their superiority over fellow gentrifiers, by wearing Act Defend Brooklyn t-shirts.